The miracle doctor won't be a kept man. My heart belongs ashore. Chapter 261. Family, Lilian mumbled. Kiran nodded. Family is where life begins. It's the starting point where we identify our position and outlook on life. A leaf on the tallest tree will eventually return to its roots. The roots of society lie in the family. Lilian shifted, mixed emotions swimming in her eyes. I didn't know you felt so strongly about family. That's because I'm always deeply moved when I see the Xander family guarding the York family. Kiran looked thoughtful. The stories and true meaning of family have been passed down through the ages. The happiness of a family has nothing to do with material wealth. Devotion and respect are the forces that unite it. Sadly, the York family didn't realize this, which led to its demise. Instead of complimenting him, Lilian frowned. Finally, she parked the car on the edge of the road and cast a sidelong glance at him. "What's wrong?" Kiran asked. "There are some things that you shouldn't talk about until you have investigated them thoroughly." Her tone was imbued with warning. Kiran was baffled. "What do you mean?" "Writing the destiny of the family, shaping values, passing down the spirit of devotion to the family and country. Sometimes we don't know what we have until it's gone." Lilian gazed at Dragonsmount in the distance. "How much do you know about the York family? How much did the Xander family even tell you?" "It's true that the York family had problems, but you can't say its culture was part of them." Kiran paused, then stared at her in astonishment. "You're from the York family?" Lilian gave a start. Realizing that she had revealed too much, she hastily shook her head. "No, I'm just a bystander sharing my own insights." "You're almost the same age as me. What insights could you possibly have?" Kiran was clearly unconvinced. "They're my personal feelings, basically." Lilian started the car. "Anyway, I won't judge the York family, but I won't accept your judgment either. That's my right as a member of the York family." Kiran pondered for a few seconds and added, "I have to make my own judgment before I can build it anew." "Suit yourself, then. Let's agree to disagree." Suddenly, Lilian switched her tone. Kiran nodded and stopped arguing with her. When the car was about a kilometer away from the abandoned building on Dragonsmount, Lilian pulled over and turned to him. "This is as far as I can go. Be careful." She unbuckled her seatbelt and got out of the car. "Will this be the last time we meet?" Kiran got out after her and asked. Lilian flinched in surprise at his question, but she quickly regained her composure. "I just hope you can relax, come back safely, and practice the joyful odyssey with me." "How can you be so sure I'll practice with you?" Kiran challenged. "Actually, I hope you won't," Lilian answered truthfully. "It's someone else's idea, isn't it?" Kiran spun on his heel and began to trek up the mountain. "I don't like other people interfering in my affairs, not even my master." "Let's agree to disagree." Lilian whirled in the other direction as well. "I hope we'll never meet again," Kiran called out. "Only if you're dead." Kiran was vexed. He could not understand why Lilian kept pestering him despite her disdain for him. However, he decided to set that thought aside for the time being. This day was the beginning of the York family's revenge, the day it rebuilt its culture. The discussion in the car had further solidified this decision. His heart pounded with pride. An alarm rang out from the abandoned building like the howling of wolves. Kiran's lips curled into an icy smile. He had come to reap their souls. Chapter 262. On the roof of a dilapidated building near the edge of Dragonsmount, a wolf-masked Regulus turned to his subordinate, who was also wearing a similar mask. "Did you bring Shannon Hill here?" "Yes, boss. We've covered every inch of her in explosives," his subordinate answered right away. "Good." Regulus slid his gaze back to Kiran, who was sauntering up the mountain, and sneered. "Even if you can break past our attacks, you will still die." "Boss, aren't we trying a little too hard? After all, you knocked him off his feet with a single punch yesterday." The subordinate was puzzled. "We can never be too careful. Wolfgate's status in the Imperial Dragon is already low. If we don't safeguard our forces, we'll only be treated with contempt in the future." Regulus's tone was calm and unreadable. "But we're at least better than Foxgate. What else can those women do besides flirt?" the subordinate protested. "You disappoint me," Regulus rebuked him. "We need to learn from Panthergate, Liongate, and Tigergate. What they can do, we can do too. For Wolfgate, our strength lies in our unity." The subordinate nodded frantically. but he was still indignant. The act of holding someone's children hostage was frowned upon by many, though none of them dared to voice their disapproval. Do another round of checks, then notify our forces to attack from a distance first before switching to close-quarters combat. Try to take out Kiran York without losing any of our people, Regulus reiterated. Yes, boss, the other man replied and hurried off to perform his duty. Regulus watched Kiran striding up the mountain leisurely with cruel amusement. Kiran York, today will be the day your family is completely wiped off the face of the earth. Prepare to rest in pieces. Meanwhile, Lilian entered Dragonsmount and met up with Lauren. With Lauren was an unconscious, beautiful, middle-aged woman, the same woman who had been brought out from the Ziegler family's mansion the night before. On closer inspection, she looked exactly like the Shannon Hill mentioned by Regulus. However, her real identity was unknown. We're ready, boss. What's our next step? Lauren asked. We stay put for now. Once the battle starts, we'll sneak up behind Regulus and put her there, said Lilian. Got it. Lilian glanced at Shannon's unconscious form. I can't wait to see what will happen later. Lauren did not reply. Lilian turned her head in Kiran's direction, a smile spreading over her ravishing face. I'm curious to find out who's important to you, Kiran. Kiran entered the complex of abandoned buildings. This time, he was seeing them with a totally different mindset. He was especially fired up by the thought of killing Wolfgate's members and commencing the York family's revenge. He scanned his surroundings with a smirk, then raised his head and called out, Regulus, are you going to snipe at me like a coward? Far away, Regulus's mouth twitched, causing his mask to shift slightly. He regarded Kiran sharply and responded in a cold voice, Today will be the day you die, Kiran York. Let's not waste our breaths. Ah. Kiran merely threw his head back and cackled. Grand words, let's not waste our breaths indeed. With a burst of strength, he sprung up like a leaf and streaked through the air toward the building where Regulus was. H.S. Regulus sucked in a breath sharply, visibly taken aback by Kiran's formidable power. Even though he had demonstrated his superiority by knocking the ladder off his feet with a single punch, he could not move through the air at all. However, Kiran had succeeded. Regulus's subordinate was just as dumbfounded, and both forgot to give the order to attack. Without Regulus's command, his underlings hiding in the other buildings made no move to attack, enabling Kiran to arrive at the center of the complex in the blink of an eye. Regulus finally snapped out of his shock. Kill him! Next to him, his subordinate jumped and shouted instinctively, Shoot him! Kiran did not bat an eye. Only his lips curled into a disdainful smirk. Whoosh! Rushing sounds pierced the air as crossbow bolts shot out of the surrounding buildings like a swarm of locusts, heading straight for him. Hidden in the bushes, Lauren glanced at Lilian. Kiran won't end up a sea urchin, will he? Oh, I hope he does, Lilian snorted. Kiran's position in mid-air made him a perfect target, and the crossbow bolts were the best offensive weapons to take him down. However, his expression did not waver, and he did not try to dodge. With a sweep of his arms, the needles in his hands whizzed toward the onslaught of arrows in flashes of silver light. Ding, ding, the clang of metal on metal rang out. Propelled by the needles, the bolts shot back in the opposite direction as if they had a mind of their own, and at a faster speed, too. Regulus's men froze in the middle of loading their crossbows as if they had seen a ghost. Before they could dodge, their bodies were penetrated with sickening squelches. Arrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr the spot, pierced by arrows and needles. Regulus's second-in-command turned to him, his eyes filled with fright. Regulus was equally alarmed by Kiran's ability, for he seemed like a wholly different person from the day before. Wolf Blizzard, trying his best to control his trepidation, he roared. "Who?" At his command, a dozen gray figures streaked toward Kiran from the building roofs like bullets. Kiran's face remained impassive, as if unaware of the approaching assailants. He only continued to wave his arms and hurl more needles. Shlok! More sounds of needles penetrating flesh were heard. The gray-clad attackers dropped dead before they could even get close to Kiran, who had already crossed half of the original distance between him and Regulus. Regulus was beside himself with panic. "Boss, should we set off the explosives now?" His subordinate could barely speak coherently. Regulus glanced at the dirt road in the middle of the complex, incandescent with rage. According to the plan, if they failed to dispatch Kiran with arrows, they would blow him up with the explosives they had buried there. Kiran had come through the air and killed the crossbowman. Regulus then initiated Wolf Blizzard to force him to the ground so they could detonate the explosives, but that course of action had failed too. What to do? Regulus racked his brains for a solution. Eventually, his gaze fell on Shannon. Take her to the explosives in the middle of the road. Once you're there, set them off and run away. His subordinate's eyes widened in terror. Scared? Regulus's eyes narrowed menacingly. No, sir! Immediately, the subordinate grabbed Shannon and dashed downstairs. Regulus whirled around to Kiran. Your mother-in-law's down there. Chapter 263. Kiran froze in midair. Glancing downward, he spotted Regulus's subordinate running toward the middle of the complex with a woman in his arms. Without a second thought, he whizzed through the air like lightning. At the same time, he flung the silver needles between his fingers at the man. The man halted abruptly. His whole body went numb, and his grip on Shannon slackened, sending her tumbling to the ground. Right before she hit the ground, Kiran swooped down and pulled her into his arms. He leaped up again, and when he passed by the man, he struck him on the head with his palm. The man's skull instantly shattered into smithereens, and his body collapsed lifelessly to the ground. Without pausing, Kiran charged at Regulus. Everything happened so fast that the latter could hardly react in time. Before he knew it, Kiran was already beside him with Shannon in his arms. Meanwhile, Lilian and Lauren had slinked into the bushes behind Regulus, bringing with them the woman who bore Shannon's face. Lilian rapped the woman lightly on the forehead, waking her up. However, she was unable to speak or move, and she could only stare at Lilian and Lauren warily. The two of them wordlessly shifted their attention outside the bushes. Regulus, today will be the day you die. Kiran laid Shannon on the ground, his body enveloped in a murderous storm. Die! Ah! Regulus laughed. There was no fear on his face, only manic glee. Kiran blinked in confusion and dropped his gaze to the unconscious woman in his arms. He woke her up with a pat on the shoulder, asking, "Is she Snow's mother?" The Shannon in his arms merely gaped at him. Nothing in her expression suggested that she recognized Snow's name. At the same time, the other Shannon in the bushes whipped her head around in shock, her eyes lighting up expectantly. Kiran was unaware of the second Shannon's presence, but the one in front of him made his stomach sink. Was she as unfeeling as Warner? His heart ached with sadness. Regulus paid no heed to all of this and seized the opportunity to swiftly retreat. Kiran's head snapped up, his eyes cold. Still trying to run. That woman in your arms is Snow's mother, can't you tell? Regulus did not stop. Despite the physical resemblance, Kiran was still skeptical because of her lack of reaction to Snow's name. So what? All I want now is to kill you. Kill me? Regulus chortled. You should focus on staying alive first. An alarm sounded in Kiran's head, and he darted his gaze to Shannon. Only then did he realize her clothes were bulging, and the hem of her shirt had ridden up to expose something wrapped around her torso. When he moved the fabric aside, his mind went blank. It was a ticking bomb with only less than 1 minute left. Damn you, Regulus Wolf. Now will you choose to kill me or save your mother-in-law? Regulus grinned wildly at him. Kiran hastily glanced down to find a way to stop the timer on the bomb. Goodbye, Kiran. Enjoy your time in hell with your mother-in-law. Cackling, Regulus retreated, ready to flee. In the trees, Lauren looked at Lilian inquiringly, waiting for her instruction. Lilian showed no emotion, seemingly unconcerned about Kiran's life. To disable the bomb, Kiran removed Shannon's jacket. His eyes fell on her exposed shoulders. She had jade-white and supple skin too young to belong to a middle-aged woman. His pupils shrank as bewilderment flashed in them, and he suddenly called out, "Snow Xander!" The woman continued to weep as she stared at the bomb, hardly batting an eye at the name. Ooh. Kiran shot to his feet, his eyes finding Regulus, who was already at the edge of the roof. You will die. Fool. He streaked in Regulus's direction like an arrow released from a bowstring. Due to the building's height, Regulus had meant to jump down carefully. However, when he saw Kiran hurtling at him, he immediately threw himself off the structure, yelling, "Aren't you going to save your mother-in-law, Kiran? I'm going to kill you!" He was already in front of Regulus before he finished his sentence. Regulus hastily thrusted his fist at him. Bam! Their fists collided directly. With a loud crack, Regulus's right arm separated from his shoulder, and he fell even more rapidly. Thump! A scream burst out of him as Regulus hit the ground heavily. He stared daggers at Kiran, who was sailing downward after him. "You're a monster! You don't care about your mother-in-law's life. You splat!" Kiran's feet landed right on his head, crushing it to a pulp in an instant. "He's got explosives on him! Run!" Lilian suddenly shouted a warning from the trees. Kiran had originally intended to head back and save Shannon, but it was too late. With a whoosh, he sped in the direction of Lilian's voice. Boom! Boom! A blast on top of the building was heard. A second later, Regulus's corpse on the ground exploded with a deafening bang. Kiran took advantage of the shock wave to hurl himself into the bushes. Lilian and Lauren were nowhere to be seen. Only Shannon remained on the ground. Kiran was stunned. His first reaction was to check for explosives, and he reached out to lift her clothes out of the way. Ah! Suddenly regaining the ability to move and speak, Shannon lashed out at him, snarling, "You bastard! I'm your mother-in-law!" Kiran withdrew his hand in astonishment and stepped back instinctively to dodge the blow. He regarded the woman before him and asked, "You know Snow, Xander? Why did Harold find a horrible husband like you for Snow? Michael would be upset when he finds out," Shannon hissed as she got to her feet. Kiran could feel his head swelling with frustration. Lilian had really done him dirty this time. He did not save the first Shannon because he recognized she was a fake. This one in front of him was the real deal. By lifting her clothes, he would be no different than a monster. Well, Kiran shifted uncomfortably. "Where's Michael? I'll go save him. They brought only me." Shannon continued to glare at him. Vexed, he raised his head and looked around. Since there were no enemies left, he had no choice but to bite the bullet. Let's go home." Shooting him a black look, Shannon planted her hands on the ground to push herself up. However, her body was still not used to its freshly reclaimed mobility, so she almost fell back. Kiran hurriedly stooped to help her up. Smack! She slapped his hand away. "Bastard!" Kiran cursed Lilian inwardly, but he had no choice but to stay quiet. After allowing her body to adjust itself for a few moments, Shannon finally regained her strength and started down the mountain. Kiran trudged after her gloomily. Nevertheless, he was more wary of his mother-in-law than anything. Her return might not necessarily bode well. Meanwhile, halfway up Dragonsmount, a stony-faced Regulus put down his binoculars. Chapter 264. "How cunning of Kiran York to fool us by concealing his strength yesterday," Regulus remarked, turning to his subordinates. "You were wise to send a substitute, boss." One of them was quick to offer a compliment. "Emph. Damn Lilian for swapping Shannon Hill with a fake. If not for her, Kiran York would have been dead meat this time," Regulus growled. "Is Lilian having an affair with Kiran?" "They came together," another subordinate suggested. "We'll leave them alone for now. They have a 7-day agreement anyway." "Let's see what will happen in another 5 days," Regulus said icily. "What should we do now?" "We stay put. Let's hide on Dragonsmount and wait for our chance." Regulus slid his gaze to Kiran and Shannon's retreating figures. "Shannon will definitely try to save Michael when she goes back. I'll use her as a chess piece to throw the Xander family into disharmony." "That's brilliant, boss," his followers chorused. Regulus's eyes narrowed derisively. "Spread the news of my death to test the reactions of the 3 big families," he ordered again. "Yes, sir," one of his men immediately answered and departed for Bayville to deliver the message. At the bottom of the mountain, Lilian started Kiran's car and signaled to Lauren with a look. "Get in and let's go." "Boss, isn't this Kiran's car?" Lauren glanced at the mountain, implying that Kiran would be coming down soon. "We saved him and his mother-in-law. He should show us some gratitude." After a pause, she declared, "This car is mine now." Lauren nodded in agreement and climbed into the passenger seat without another word. Lilian drove off. When Kiran and Shannon reached the foot of the mountain, the road was empty and his car was nowhere in sight. He guessed right away that Lilian had taken it. He took out his cell phone to call Snow and ask her to pick him up. Just then, The roar of an engine was heard. He instantly perked up and glanced in the direction of the noise. A white Maserati appeared before him. Before it could come to a complete stop, Yvonne jumped out and rushed over to him. Before Kiran could speak, she threw her arms around him, sobbing. "You're alive! You're still alive! Wah!" Her true feelings came gushing out, her concern no longer disguisable. Kiran squirmed uncomfortably, especially when he felt Shannon's menacing eyes boring into his back. "Ahem. Huh?" He cleared his throat. "I managed to rescue Snow's mom," Yvonne exclaimed and retracted her arms, her eyes darting to Shannon. Shannon's face, which bore a noticeable resemblance to Snow's, was as black as thunder, and her eyes glinted with cold fury. Yvonne was mortified. She had genuinely been worried about Kiran's safety and hence driven all the way to Dragonsmount. She was still a ways off when she heard the explosion. Believing Kiran was dead, she cried and accelerated for the remaining distance. It was concern and excitement that led her to lose her composure and embrace him upon getting out of the car, only to be caught off guard by the presence of Snow's mother. "Just ignore me." Shannon flashed Kiran an insincere smile. "When I get back, I'll make sure Snow divorces you." Kiran was overcome with helplessness and embarrassment. He especially wished he could slap himself for even attempting to lift her clothes. His shame only grew when he thought of the Xander family's sacrifice for the York family. Assuming Shannon was mad because she had hugged Kiran and cried, Yvonne explained hastily, "This is all a misunderstanding, Mrs. Xander. Kiran saved me yesterday, so I was just worried about his safety." "Why is that any of my concern?" Shannon retorted frostily. "Why don't we take Yvonne's car back first?" Kiran tried to coax her. "You two can go ahead. I'll find my way back on my own." With that, she started down the mountain without waiting for their response. Kiran was distressed. "We're a long way away from the city. Besides, Bayville has changed a lot." "You could. Just leave me alone!" Shannon interrupted him brusquely. Kiran could only swallow his frustration as he reminded himself that she had been imprisoned for 15 years for the York family's sake. He took out his mobile phone and called Snow. All it took was one ring before Snow picked up. "How did it go, Kiran?" "I killed Regulus Wolf." Wah. On the other end, Snow cut him off as she started sobbing with relief. Her overflowing love filled him with guilt. He sneaked a peek at Shannon's frigid face before forcing himself to say, "I rescued your mom, and I need you to pick us up." "Huh?" Finally remembering their bet, Snow answered in delight, "I'll be right there." Kiran still wanted to talk, but Snow had already hung up in excitement and departed in her car. Her reaction was purely natural, but it infuriated Shannon nonetheless. Just now, Snow had expressed concern for Kiran's safety first instead of hers. Moreover, when Snow heard that she had been rescued, she hung up right away without talking to her. This made Shannon feel that she was dispensable and unimportant, setting off a fire of resentment inside her. Kiran knew something was wrong from her stormy expression, but there was nothing he could do. At that moment, he was more worried about the reason behind Shannon's return. Would Wolfgate and the Imperial Dragon really let them make it out so smoothly? He had witnessed Warner's viciousness when he murdered Alfred. If Shannon had become as callous as him, it would only spell future trouble for the Xander family. This incident was very likely a trap. Yvonne stood aside awkwardly, unsure of how to carry herself. "Why don't you head back first?" "Snow will be here in a while," said Kiran. Yvonne's face fell. Ultimately, she was only an outsider to their family. She nodded and squeezed out a sad smile, then got into her car and drove up the mountain. She pretended to make a U-turn to leave, but all she did was park her car a distance away. Shannon stood in place, gazing at the sprawling city below the mountain. Remembering that she had been held captive for 15 years because of the York family and Dragonsmount, she simmered with infinite hatred. Kiran would rather kill Regulus than save her impostor, which meant that she did not matter to him at all. Her ill will toward him mounted as she transferred all her animosity for the York family onto him. At this moment, she was already blinded with hatred. It was all she could feel for Kiran and the York family. She was even starting to contemplate how to get revenge on Kiran and the Xander family. Half an hour later, Snow pulled up in her car. The sight of her mother triggered another stream of fresh tears rolling down her already wet cheeks. However, Shannon's face remained impassive. It was as if snow was invisible to her. Chapter 265. Mom! Snow cried out and rushed over. 15 years of longing, conveyed through emotional tears. 15 years of expectant waiting channeled into a single cry. At that moment, all Snow wanted was to hold her mother tight and be held in return, to feel the realness of maternal love. Useless girl! I can't believe you found yourself this scumbag of a husband. Shannon's cold and cruel words pressed against Snow's throat like a sharp blade, freezing her in her tracks. Her mother was right in front of her, but she emanated an aloofness that made her seem so far away. Snow could hardly describe the emotions churning in her. Without another word, Shannon spun on her heel and marched to the car. She opened the door and sat in the passenger seat before sparing a glance in Snow's direction. Take me back to the Xander family's residence. I have a score to settle with that old man. Snow felt an invisible hand gripping her heart. How could she talk about Harold so disrespectfully? Was this really her mother? Over the past 15 years, she had imagined countless images of her mother. In all of them, she was kind, gentle, and amiable, far from the indifferent and unfeeling woman before her eyes. She glanced at Kiran, forlorn and helpless tears swimming in her almond-shaped eyes. Kiran's heart ached, but all he could do was shrug and say, Shannon can ride with you. I'll take Yvonne's car and follow behind. Snow knew her sports car could not seat 3 people, and now was not the right time to ask for more details either. With a mechanical nod, she trudged back to her car, started it, and drove off. Yvonne had been waiting all this time. When she noticed that Kiran was not riding with Snow, she drove over and stopped in front of him. Kiran was immersed in thought as he opened the door and let himself in. Snow's mom seems like a difficult person, Yvonne commented tentatively, looking somewhat uncertain. Kiran gazed after Snow's car, noting the obvious lack of interaction between her and Shannon. Familial love is born from spending time together. People like her, did Wolfgate extinguish the love they had for their family? There was a flicker of sadness in Yvonne's eyes as she thought of her own mother. That's one of the reasons. I guess it depends on human nature, too. Kiran was unsure how to explain it. In short, he was not at all relieved about Shannon's return. On the contrary, it gave him an inexplicable sense of foreboding. Do you think she'll become the kind of mother-in-law who hates her son-in-law? Yvonne suddenly wondered out loud. I don't care what. I'm not gonna suck up to her anyway, Kiran responded adamantly. Theft! A chuckle escaped from Yvonne's lips. Why are you laughing? Kiran was perplexed. I seriously wonder how Snow managed to conquer a man like you. For the first time, Yvonne sounded like a busybody. Snow and I have romantic and familial love, things that others can never understand. So don't even dream of it. Kiran seemed intent on quashing Yvonne's hopes. It's not like my dream will come true. You're not interested in me, and we haven't resolved the feud between the Quinn and York families, Yvonne muttered petulantly. You should focus on researching beauty products with Frank. We must win the battle with Blooming Group and draw out the mastermind behind everything. Kiran changed the subject. Don't worry. For you, I can leave the Quinn family and risk my life. Yvonne's tone was resolute, and a blush tinged her pale complexion. Kiran chose not to respond and kept his eyes on Snow's car. Some things just could not be changed, like the fact that Snow was the only one he loved. For her sake, he would never change, even if he had to confront the greatest of enemies or tribulations. Yvonne was crestfallen, but she held her tongue. More than half an hour later, they arrived at the entrance of the Xander family's villa. Yvonne parked the car, and Kiran got out. For the woman you love, you should learn to be patient sometimes. Just then, she looked at him and offered a reminder. Chapter 266. Kiran paused in surprise, but he turned and walked into the courtyard without a word. Yvonne gazed after him, her eyes shining with hope, love, and wistfulness. She could never capture his attention after all. Shannon, you're back. When Harold caught sight of Shannon from the second floor, he shouted enthusiastically through the window and hurried downstairs. Shannon got out of the car, her eyes raking over the Xander family's villa. More than 10 years had gone by, yet it was as grand and palatial as ever. The thought of herself suffering in captivity all those years while they indulged in luxury ignited the fury and indignance in her. The sight of Kiran strolling in as if it were his home only fueled her rage. Harold emerged from the house. "Shannon, my child, you're back." Weeping with joy, he ran up to her to embrace her. Although he was behaving a little too excited for a father-in-law, to him, she was no different from a daughter. After 15 years of missing her and being tormented by separation, he had almost given up the hope of seeing her again in this lifetime. At that moment, he was overcome with exhilaration. "I'm surprised you still remember I'm your daughter-in-law, Harold." Shannon's tone was glacial. Her words rained down on him like a bucket of cold water, stopping him in his tracks. His delighted expression froze on his face, and he gaped at her in bewilderment. How did his gentle, virtuous, and filial daughter-in-law become so bitter and mean? "She was like a completely different person," Shannon snorted. "For 15 years, Michael and I suffered while you wallowed in milk and honey. Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" Harold flinched and turned pale at her harsh rebuke. "Mom, Grandpa never stopped looking for you and Dad all these years. He shed a lot of tears for you." Snow quickly intervened. "Shut up!" Shannon cut her off tersely, whirling on her. "As for you, I can't believe you married a York. If it weren't for them, we wouldn't have been oppressed by the 3 big families, and your father and I wouldn't have been locked away for years. You're a disgrace to our family." Snow's face crumpled and her eyes reddened. At this moment, Kiran strode over and grabbed her hand before facing Shannon. "If you're unhappy about that, take it out on me. It's true my family has brought suffering to yours." "Let go of my daughter's hand," Shannon hissed. "You will get a divorce today." "I won't let you two be together." "Mom," Snow wailed bitterly. "Snow will forever be my wife. I'll never divorce her." Kiran's tone was calm yet unwavering. If Yvonne had not reminded him to be patient, he would have stormed off with Snow without a word. "It's me or this brat Snow." "Your choice," Shannon said ruthlessly. Snow stiffened, her mind in turmoil. "Shannon, I know you've suffered all these years, but you need to understand the current situation first." Harold finally stepped in and broke the tension. "It's your fault the Xander family has turned out this way. You have no right to say that, and you have no right to decide my daughter's future," Shannon shot back. "Snow's pregnant with my child, so a divorce is impossible." Kiran could barely contain the anger in his voice. Snow gave a start and hurled a glare at him, a silent warning to avoid provoking her mother. Sure enough, Shannon's hackles rose, and she jabbed a finger at Kiran. I'm only allowing you to point your finger at me because you're Snow's mother. Otherwise, I'll make sure you'll never get to use that hand again," Kiran threatened icily. "Is this the grandson-in-law you wanted, Harold? Is this the husband you wanted, Snow? Michael, we're doomed to have our lives ruined by the York family." Shannon sank onto the ground, howling and making a scene. Snow broke free of Kiran's grasp and ran over to help her up. "Smack!" Shannon raised her hand and slapped her. Snow was rooted to the spot in shock. Kiran's eyebrows shot up. Chapter 267. "I'm grateful to the Xander family for guarding Dragonsmount for the past 20 years, and I deeply apologize for the fact that you were held hostage and imprisoned for my family's sake. But Snow is now my wife and the lady of the York family. You have no right to hit her," Kiran roared at Shannon. "I have no right? I gave birth to her. I made her from my own flesh. Without me, she wouldn't even exist." His sudden outburst only escalated her rage. "Kiran, that's enough." Snow was caught in a dilemma. Kiran gathered her close and glared at Shannon. "Since you think the York family owes you, name your price. No matter your wish, I will do whatever it takes to make it happen." "Kiran!" Harold shouted, warning him not to be impulsive. However, Kiran fixed Shannon with a steadfast gaze. If it was for Snow, he would willingly go to the ends of the earth. Snow clutched his arm, happiness and strong affection bubbling up within her. "So, you want to make it up to us, right?" Shannon regarded him coldly. "You can think of it that way, but once I've granted your wish, Snow will be the lady of the York family, and you're no longer allowed to interfere in our lives," Kiran answered. "Fine," Shannon nodded. "I won't ask for much. I only have 3 requests. Mom." Snow was worried that she would give Kiran an impossible task. "Go ahead," said Kiran. "The first is to rescue Snow's father and kill all those who imprisoned us." "No problem. As long as they're from that side, I'll kill them one by one until all are dead." "Kiran!" Snow grabbed his shirt, her eyes wide with anxiousness. He gave her a determined nod. "I need to help them get the justice they deserve." Kiran. Snow was moved to tears. At this moment she was the happiest woman in the world, ready to live and die together with him. I don't believe in sweet talk, Shannon scoffed. My second request is to give Dragonsmount to the Xander family. That's impossible, a grim-faced Harold objected. Shannon ignored him and continued to watch Kiran with cruel amusement, waiting for his answer. A mixture of ambivalent emotions flashed across his face. The significance of Dragonsmount to the York family was more symbolic than practical. Losing it would be equivalent to losing the family's standing in Bayville and a resting place for its wandering ghosts. His silence drew a sneer from Shannon. Can't bear to give it up, huh? All of a sudden, a question popped up in Kiran's mind. Who was Shannon acquiring Dragonsmount for? Not the Xander family, definitely. He snickered to himself. Those people could never afford to own Dragonsmount. Dragonsmount would always belong to the York family. He inclined his head without hesitation. Deal, Kiran. Sobs racked Snow's body. For you, I can give up everything I have. Kiran gazed at her tenderly. He meant what he said. The Xander family had indeed sacrificed too much for the York family. He could understand Shannon's fury, so he wanted to relieve Snow of her quandary. Shannon was visibly startled by his willingness to surrender Dragonsmount. It was the only symbol of the York family's existence in Bayville. Without it, the York family would cease to exist. However, when she reminded herself of the deal she had made before her return, all traces of guilt vanished, and she said matter-of-factly, My third request is, from now on, you're not allowed to see Snow until the first two have been completed. If I catch you together even once, all conditions will no longer be valid. Mom, that's not fair, Snow protested tearfully. It's either you take my side or you watch me die, Shannon said obstinately. You. Snow stared at her miserably and helplessly. I agree to your 3 requests. Now I'll fulfill the second one and give Dragonsmount to the Xander family. With that, he turned to locate Serena in the crowd. Prepare the contract. Serena looked grave, but she obediently left to prepare the contract. Shannon's gaze swept over the others and fell on Margaret and Rain, whose faces she did not recognize. She immediately said to Harold, Get these outsiders out of here. I refuse to let them dirty our land. Harold was conflicted. On the one hand, Kiran was a wonderful grandson-in-law. On the other hand, his daughter-in-law had indeed endured 15 years of hardship, and his own son had yet to return. Kiran was much less perturbed. We'll leave once the contract is signed. Shannon ignored him pointedly by turning her head to the side, her face still stony. In less than 10 minutes, Serena had drawn up the contract and showed it to Shannon, who nodded after reading it. Sign it. Kiran picked up the pen, signed, stamped his fingerprint, and handed it to her. From now on, Dragonsmount belongs to the Xander family. Her glee was unmistakable as she signed her name with a flourish. Harold looked extremely upset. To Snow, Shannon's delighted expression made her seem even more aloof and cold. Shannon tossed a copy of the contract to Kiran. Now clear out. Don't let me see you until you rescue Snow's father. Kiran caught it and passed it to Serena, his eyes never leaving Shannon. Don't worry. I'm a man of my word. Shannon only turned away and pursed her lips in disbelief. Kiran returned to Snow's side. Cupping her face in his hands, he used his inner strength to reduce the swelling on her cheek and wiped away her tears. Wait for me. All these problems will be solved very soon. She nodded through her tears. Promise me you'll be careful. Don't worry. Killing those weaklings will be a piece of cake. He forced a smile to comfort her. Be careful, or you'll get blown up by those weaklings, Shannon snarled. Snow blanched and opened her mouth to speak, but Kiran hushed her by pressing his thumbs over her lips. Trust me, she nodded again to convey her confidence in him. Kiran glanced at Harold. Call me if you need anything. I'll be going now. Kiran, you can't rescue someone overnight. Remember to stay calm, Harold said solemnly. Don't worry, Grandpa. I have a plan, Kiran reassured him. If anything happens to you, I won't live without you either, Snow declared with determination. Foolish girl, Shannon scoffed. Kiran gave Snow one last nod before wheeling around to take Margaret's arm. Let's go, Mom. Margaret nodded, her concern and confusion palpable in her eyes. With Kiran and Rain supporting her on both sides, she made her way out of the yard. Serena followed them. Shannon snickered. What a pathetic bunch of strays. Kiran seethed with rage but stifled it for Snow and Harold's sake. Now he was certain that Shannon's return was a mistake, a conspiracy even. The cogs in his head turned as he mulled over how to substantiate his theory. Sighing, Harold shuffled back into the villa. Snow stared at her mother, dismayed that the closest person to her had now become a total stranger. Ignoring her, Shannon strutted into the house and headed straight to her room. Her indifference was like a knife in Snow's heart. She dashed out and watched forlornly as Kiran and the others gradually disappeared into the distance. Kiran hailed a taxi and instructed Serena to take Margaret and Rain back to Marina Breeze Court. As for himself, he took another cab to Neptune's Cove Karaoke. Chapter 268. When Kiran got to Neptune's Cove Karaoke, the door was closed. It was still daytime, which meant that it was not business hours yet. He discreetly parked his sports car in the parking lot because he knew Lilian would be inside. Then he knocked on the door. The door swung open, and Lauren stood there. Surprised, she asked Kiran, "What are you doing here?" "I'm looking for the owner." Kiran walked inside after saying that. Whoosh! Lauren went up to stop him, but a single wave from Kiran made her stumble backward like she had been hit by a strong gust of wind. As soon as Kiran entered the place, he heard the joyful odyssey echoing throughout the halls of Neptune's Cove Karaoke. He followed the sound and saw Lilian sitting there playing the harp. Lauren was annoyed, so she went up to stop him again. "Lauren, ask the others to go out. Don't let them in until I say so," Lilian's charming and pleasant voice sounded. "Yes, ma'am," Lauren said. With a single whistle, women started leaving the place. Lauren went out and locked the door behind her. "Kiran, you look troubled." "Is there something bothering you?" Lilian said. Kiran stood with his hands behind his back while he looked at Lilian's hourglass figure from behind. She looked like an angel that had descended from heaven as she played the harp. The view of her back alone was enough to make anyone swoon. "Why aren't you saying anything? Were you peeking at me and got mesmerized by my looks?" Lilian teased with her sweet voice. "I'm not peeking, nor am I mesmerized," Kiran responded nonchalantly. "Am I not beautiful enough for you?" Lilian smiled with a hint of curiosity. "Your beauty has nothing to do with me. I only have eyes for one woman, my wife Snow." "Ha!" Lilian chuckled. "Snow isn't here. You don't have to profess your love for her. It's not nice of you to compliment a goddess when another one is standing in front of you. It makes you seem rude." "I'm not being rude. I'm just letting you know that nothing will happen between us," Kiran said. "In that case, what are you doing here?" "Leave," Lilian sneered. "You're from Foxgate under Imperial Dragon, aren't you?" Kiran said suddenly. Lilian was unfazed. Instead, she reacted calmly, saying, "I'm the alluring vixen." Kiran did not know how to respond. "Do you know why I won't let you see my real face?" Lilian asked, smiling. "Why?" "Because I'm a vixen. I'm afraid that you will fall for my beauty if you see my real face." "Hey," Lilian giggled. Kiran could not hold in his laughter. "You must think too highly of yourself. In my eyes, no one is more beautiful than Snow." "I know that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but that doesn't apply to me." Lilian looked relaxed. "Answer me," Kiran said seriously. "I've already revealed my identity. What else do you want me to say?" "Do you want me to say no?" Lilian asked with a smile. "Go to hell." A sudden murderous desire filled Kiran. "Kiran, I am the ultimate goddess. Do you really have the heart to kill me?" Lilian paused for a while before continuing. "If it weren't for me, you would have been killed by the bomb. Don't you know how to be grateful?" When Kiran heard that, he got even more angry. "Why did you have to let Shannon eavesdrop?" Sigh. Lilian sighed in disappointment. "What do you mean?" Kiran asked. "Why are you such an idiot?" Lilian sounded annoyed. Kiran froze. "Warner and Shannon are back. Did you think their lives had been easy while they were imprisoned for so many years?" "Of course I know it wasn't easy." "Then do you know why they came back but not the others? Did they make some sort of deal?" Although Kiran had a hunch, he pretended not to know. "I guess you're not that stupid," Lilian said rudely. After a moment of silence, she continued, "If they came back acting normal, their family relationship will do you more damage than you think." Kiran's lips twitched at her unpleasant words, though it was sound advice. "Because of what I did, Shannon's anger will go out of control, and she will soon give herself away. Then, you'll have more information." Kiran was shocked. What she said made sense, but why was Lilian helping him? You're probably wondering why I'm helping you, Lilian read his mind. Are you trying to get me to help you practice the joyful Odyssey? Kiran asked. That's one of the reasons. What's the other reason? Kiran asked curiously. The other reason is that I don't want to see you make a fool of yourself again. Fifth, Lilian laughed. Kiran was in disbelief. He said, What if I don't satisfy your request? You can refuse, but then you will never achieve your goal, Ilan said calmly. Why can't I achieve my goal? I can kill all of Imperial Dragon. That's just wishful thinking. Did you think you killed Regulus today? I killed him, Kiran said firmly, though his curiosity was piqued. Ha, Lilian scoffed. Is Regulus still alive? Kiran asked her to confirm. Did you think Regulus would die that easily? Kiran remembered the masks. It was a last-minute attack, and he did not see anyone there after the explosion, so the person who died could have been a substitute. Kiran said frustratedly, Cunning bastard. If he really wanted to kill you, why would he bring Shannon back? How could he have lost his strength in a fight against you? Kiran's face darkened, and his eyes narrowed. If that was the case, it may be tougher to kill him than he thought. Imperial Dragon is like a game of chess. You fight each enemy separately, but to understand it as a whole is not as easy as you think. Kiran calmed himself down and gave it some thought. She was right. Then he looked at her and chuckled. Fine. In that case, it's easy. Easy? Lilian's interest was piqued. That's right. It's going to be very easy. Kiran smiled at Lilian's elegant back. Chapter 269. What's your plan? Tell me. Lilian's back was still to Kiran. She sounded curious but unconvinced. Let's work together, said Kiran. You want me to work with you? Lilian scoffed. Yes, Kiran said with certainty. Kiran, you're overly optimistic. Why would I want to work with you? Lilian asked with a most charming smile. Of course, you would want to work with me, Kiran said confidently. Please, elaborate. Lilian was still smiling happily. Number 1, you don't want me to die. Number 2, you want me to help you practice the joyful Odyssey. And number 3, you must have other plans in mind for me, Kiran said to the beautiful yet mysterious woman. You, peft. Lilian let out a cheerful laugh. So, this is what a narcissist is like. Kiran was not mad at her response. He was as confident as ever. I'll give you some time to think. I don't need time to think, Lilian blurted. You agree? Kiran asked eagerly while smiling with his eyes. I will never agree, Lilian said, shaking her head. Why? Because you can't fulfill my request, Lilian said. What request? Never marry or have sex with a woman for the rest of your life. Lilian sounded stern. Kiran froze. How could he disappoint his wife? Even if Lilian did not want to work with him, he was still confident that he could kill the people from Imperial Dragon. Lilian smiled contemptuously. If you can't do that, you have no right to work with me? In that case, let's just go our separate ways. Kiran understood her now. I've said that twice today, so you should understand by now, right? Lilian sneered. I understand. Get ready to fight me for Neptune's Cove karaoke in 5 days. Lilian threw in a casual reminder. I won't forget. Kiran turned around and left. Are you leaving? Lilian frowned, listening to his footsteps as he walked away. Since we're not working together anyway, why can't I leave? Kiran looked confused. Annoyed, Lilian's eyebrows twitched. You wasted a lot of my time today. I haven't practiced the joyful Odyssey yet, so you have to practice with me. I'm busy, said Kiran before turning around to leave. Lilian was actually angry now. Buzz. She strummed the harp to make a sound, and a striking force swept toward him. Kiran took a deep breath as his body exuded the same force. Bam, bam, bam. A chain of loud sounds was heard, and neither of them moved. There was a hint of surprise in Kiran's gaze. He did not expect Lilian's powers to be on par with his. Lilian smiled charmingly. It seems like you need to put in more work, Kiran. How can you talk about destroying Imperial Dragon when you can't even beat me? Kiran shook off his thoughts and said, I can beat you. I'm just not going all out. Should we continue then? Lilian chuckled. Since you helped me today, I won't fight you, said Kiran. If we're going our separate ways, aren't you afraid that I'll be a strong rival? Lilian asked. You're no match for me. Kiran left proudly. You think too highly of yourself. Lilian sounded cold. That's none of your business. Kiran replied. How can you rebuild the York family alone? With the help of the few women around you and Onyx's weaklings? In your dreams. Shut up! Kiran cursed angrily. You can't face reality, and your hypocrisy is the problem. The truth will always prevail, Lilian added. Woo! Kiran turned to look at her. Lilian still had her back to him. She looked like a painting of a beautiful goddess. If you continue like this, you'll drag more people down with you. Imperial Dragon is too strong. You will never be able to destroy them. Are you done? If you don't get out here in 5 days, you'll be sorry, Kiran said coldly. Sorry? Are you going to make me sorry with your words? Lilian sneered. Kiran clenched his fists. You'll find out soon. Kiran walked out of Neptune's Cove karaoke. Pluck, pluck, pluck. Lilian quickly moved her fingers over the harp and pressed on it to stop the sound. You fool. How are you always so stubborn? Can't you just try to be a little nicer? Kiran stared at the sun, but his body felt cold. Lilian was right. He was weak, and he lacked manpower. However, he had to become stronger for the York family. He was confident in Onyx and the others. Regulus, since you're not dead yet, I'll drag you out and kill you. Kiran got into the car and drove to the Ziegler family's house. At the Ziegler's house, Warner, Henry, and Theodore were inside. They had just received the shocking news that Kiran had killed Regulus, so they gathered for a meeting to discuss what to do with Kiran. To be precise, only Warner and Theodore were thinking of how to deal with him. Henry was already on Kiran's side. Warner looked at the other two and said, Even if Mr. Wolf is dead, someone will come and kill Kiran. We don't have to worry about that. Henry remained silent, and so did Theodore. Are you two afraid of dying? Warner stared at them angrily. Both of them despised Warner. How could that son of a bitch kill his father without blinking an eye? What's the point of working with him? Henry suppressed his hatred for him and said, Warner, the problem is not that we're afraid of death, but what Kiran is going to do with us. Isn't that the same as being afraid of dying? Warner scolded. No, it's not. No matter how powerful Imperial Dragon is, it will take time before they come here. And Kiran will come to find us any time now, said Theodore. Does Kiran have the guts to come find us? Warner said disdainfully. He did not believe him. I'm here. Kiran's voice came from the door. Chapter 270. When Henry and Theodore heard Kiran's voice, they leaped to their feet out of fear. Warner got even angrier. He looked around to call for the bodyguards, but they were nowhere to be found. Stop looking around. Your bodyguards ran away faster than rabbits when they saw me, Kiran said calmly. Warner felt antsy. He mustered up the courage to look at Kiran and asked, What are you doing here? I'll give you 2 choices, Kiran said casually. What are they? Warner asked coldly, pretending to be calm. You either die right now or tell me where the Wolfgate's headquarters is, said Kiran. When Warner heard him talk about dying, it was as if he could see his father's eyes the moment before he died. Chills went down his spine as he subconsciously took a step back. Henry and Theodore were contemplating Kiran's intentions. Henry, Theodore, you should ask Warner about your children. Weren't you all together? Both their expressions instantly changed as they turned toward Warner. Kiran's question made Warner instantly alert. He stared at Kiran and said, I don't know. I'm not locked up with them. Not locked up with them? Where are you locked up then? Kiran smiled. First, Warner whimpered as he could not bring himself to say it. You're not going to tell me you don't know, are you? Kiran smiled. That's right. I really don't know. Warner saw an opportunity and took it. Kiran nodded as if he believed him. He turned toward Henry and Theodore and said, It seems like we don't know where your children are being held. The two of them stared blankly. They had no idea what Kiran was trying to do. Warner hurriedly nodded. I really don't know. Ha, Kiran scoffed. Warner, you say you don't know where they are, but how do you know so much about the Ziegler family? Warner's expression changed when he realized that he accidentally exposed himself. Kiran seemed to be in a good mood today. He smiled at Henry and Theodore. You should be careful. Your children may be watching you, and one day. Kiran paused. He forcefully stabbed the air and said, They'll kill you with a fork. Panic appeared in Henry and Theodore's eyes as they gasped. You're just trying to scare them. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have killed my father. You forced me to kill him. Warner was furious. You could have died to save his life, but you chose to kill him. You're the cruel one, Kiran sneered. He glanced at Henry and Theodore, saying, heartless bastard, heartless bastard. Those words echoed in the ears of Henry and Theodore as they grew nervous. Kiran paused to check the time, then grinned at Warner. I'll be at the Zeiglers' house at 8 in the evening. You can either disclose Wolfgate's headquarters location, or you can brace yourself for your demise. Whoosh. A gust of cold wind blew across Warner's back. His body went cold like a poisonous snake was wrapped around him. Kiran looked at the other two and said, Aren't you curious where they are? Henry and Theodore did not speak, but their eyes were full of anticipation. See you at 8 o'clock. Kiran left. After he left, they sighed in relief. Soon after, Henry and Theodore looked at Warner questioningly. I don't know anything. I was locked up in a house and I couldn't leave. I know about my family because they would give us information about them every week and every end of the month, Warner explained angrily. Henry did not understand what Kiran was going to do, but he decided to wait until he came back. Theodore, on the other hand, looked as if he did not care. Their unusual reactions made Warner even more anxious. After they left, Warner felt uneasy at home. Regulus was the one who arranged for him to come back. How was he supposed to respond to Kiran's threat now that Regulus was dead? Kiran obviously did not believe him, nor would he show him any mercy. The thought of being killed by Kiran made him panic. Warner frantically took out his phone to dial the emergency number Regulus gave him. The call got through in one ring. As if he had found his savior, Warren said, Kiran came to my house and forced me to tell him where I was being held. If I don't tell him, he'll kill me. What should I do? Where's Kiran? The other person's voice was cold. He left. He said that he'll be back at 8. Warner panicked. I got it. Leave it to me. He hung up. Warner felt more at ease. Meanwhile, the man who answered the call looked at Regulus. The phone was on speaker just now. Regulus squinted. There were complex emotions behind his eyes, and he smirked. Kiran has lost his mind for wanting to save Michael Xander. Mr. Wolf, what do we do? The other man asked. What do you think, Chase? Regulus asked. I'm guessing that Shannon played a role in making Kiran question Warren. Regulus nodded. That makes sense. Reach out to Shannon right now and have her meet Kiran at 8. At 8? Chase asked. Then he smiled even wider and gave Regulus a thumbs up. Good thinking, Mr. Wolf. Now Kiran won't be able to go to Warren on time. Regulus nodded. That's right. Warren would think that Kiran got scared. Once he gets rid of his fear of Kiran, he can fight back. Would Kiran just kill Warren? Chase said concernedly. I don't think so. Kiran will want to get answers from Warren, Regulus guessed. What if he finds out? Chase asked. Regulus gave it some thought and said, Tell Warner to say that he went to work at the Zeiglers company, which is why he dared not show his face. Just create a fake identity for him. Chase gave another thumbs up. That's amazing. That way the Quinn family, the Marsh family, and the Xander family would all go looking for their children. Then, Kiran will be distracted. Regulus nodded. Exactly. We will mislead him and stall for time until his fight with Lilian. Then it'll be our chance. Mr. Wolf, you're brilliant, Chase complimented him. Go get it done, Regulus ordered. While Chase was calling Shannon, Kiran was calling Snow at the same time.